Let's jump in. We're here to meet. Just a reminder, I guess you go ahead and throw us to the agenda, Caroline. So just real quick, what we're going to cover today. Obviously, the majority of this conversation will be around best practices for managing the Liquibase changelogs, but we'll do a little bit of introductory statements before that, and then we'll certainly have an open discussion throughout the conversation with Nathan, and if there's any other follow-up questions, even if they're not related to changelogs, we can talk about those as well today. So just a reminder, we're here to meet each other, to learn something about Liquibase, to ask questions and share problems, and to share our insights and information with each other. We're going to talk about best practices from our point of view, things we've heard from the community, but certainly if you have other experiences, we'd love to hear about that as well. Reminder, this is a place for people to share questions, ideas, and experiences. We expect everyone to be respectful, and please give each other opportunities to participate. All right, we're going to do something different for introductions this week. Instead of going around the room, we're going to give everybody 30 seconds to rename your Zoom window. And if you can put your first name, your country, your role, and your changelog format. And I'm going to go do the same right now.
How do we do that? Is there a settings dialog?
If you hover over your picture, you'll see 3 dots on the upper right side. If you click that and click rename, you should be able to do that.
Perfect.
And now you can have fun with people at work moving forward, changing your name and messing with them. So
nice.
Awesome. I like Nathan's Liquibase maker.
Try to have fun.
It's cool. It's great to see where people are from.
All right, give people a couple more seconds here to get theirs finished. I think Karthik and Piotr and Raul. All right. Well, they'll catch up to us. All right. Why don't we go ahead to the next slide, Caroline? All right. Well, we're doing something new. We're going to start spending some time talking about best practices, things we've learned over time. This is our first and hopefully a good series. Today we have Nathan, the Liquibase founder, is going to speak to us about managing Liquibase changelogs, best practices, things that we've learned from the community, and things that he's learned over the past. How many years has it been? 12?
15. Remember, we just had a party.
Oh, yes, we just had a 15-year party. Gosh, my mind.
You even have a shirt.
I know. All right. Well, perfect. Well, why don't you go ahead and kick us off, Nathan? Oh, wait. Caroline has something first.
Before we jump into that, I'm going to launch a quick little poll. We are just curious to learn a little bit more about your Liquibase experience, just so we can kind of understand our audience a little bit better. So I'm going to launch the poll right now, and feel free to take a couple seconds to give us your insights, really just so we know your experience level with Liquibase. Okay. All right, I think that's mostly everybody. So it looks like, oh, a couple more. Okay, that's pretty much everybody. Well, we're getting there. Looks like most people are less than 6 months. And we do have most people behind that 6 months to 2 years. And we've had a handful of people that have used it more than 2 years. Okay, that's interesting. That's great information for us to have. All right, thank you for doing that. I will pass it off back to Nathan.
All right, yeah, thanks. That kind of is, it helps me kind of know sort of the level to talk to for the people here, although we're going to save it for posterity. So I'll, kind of make sure to cover sort of both intro and advanced, but I kind of try to hit everybody, but yeah, kind of helps to know the audience I'm talking to a little bit here. So yeah, like Kevin mentioned, the thing we're talking about today is the sort of database, managing your database changelog files, some of the kind of best practices, options, kind of things to think about with that. So the first thing I wanted to kind of talk about a bit was the different changelog formats that we have. So with Liquibase, we have 4 different changelog formats. There's SQL, there's XML, there's JSON, there's YAML, really in all of the cases, what the changelogs are is there a way to, it's a way to just kind of have your ordered list of changes that you want to apply to your database. We'll show the example of them in a second. But really what you use to sort of choose between them is there's some pros and cons to each, but a lot of it also just kind of comes down to what your team needs, what your team is comfortable with, and you can certainly mix and match them as well too. So sometimes one format may work better for some cases for you and others, and so you can always mix and match them as well here. If you go to the next slide here, it's one thing that is always kind of interesting to see is the mixture of what changelogs people use the most. You can see we have a couple different polls we've asked, and we get different answers. Usually the SQL format and the XML format tend to be the most popular. It looks like but JSON and YAML is definitely in there as well too. And like I said, a lot of it really kind of depends on what your team likes, what tools you're comfortable with. But all the different formats get used by people. So don't feel bad about using any one of them. Regardless of the format that you're using, they're all really kind of structured the same way, where you have the changelog is kind of the term we use for the file as a whole. It has, and within that changelog file, we have a set of change sets. In this case of this formatted SQL file, what we do is we're just kind of trying to match something that would be valid SQL that you could just paste into your SQL command line, and it would just execute it outside of Liquibase if you really wanted to. But what we do is we add some extra sort of comment-based annotations in there so that we're able to better understand what's going on. So a couple examples here, so you start out with that Liquibase formatted SQL at the top so that we know that's what it is, and not just a generic raw SQL file. And then each change set, you mark with that -- change set. And the change sets each change set gets uniquely identified with an ID and an author. In this case, the author is Voxland, and the ID is the number 1 in this case. And then within that change set, you have the changes that you want to apply. For formatted SQL, what you can do is you can just the only option for changes is the raw SQL that you want to run, and Liquibase is just going to run what you have in there against the database. But because you have it broken up by change sets with that comment, we're tracking which of those have been ran and which of them haven't. If you go to the next slide, as you look at something like an XML changelog, you still have that same structure where you have your changelog file, you have a different sort of header starting point because it's a different format. You have change sets within there, and then you have changes inside each of those change sets. It's just formatted differently. Internally, Liquibase, once we parse it, it's the same, but it's really all about kind of what makes sense for you. What you see different in the XML version is we have this sort of we have the option of having more of a sort of a semantic description of what you want to do. In this case, it's create table, and so that while even in XML, you can use a SQL tag and then just put whatever raw SQL you want, and we just execute that. XML gives you the option of having these sort of more descriptions, and you think of it sort of like a function call, where there's a Liquibase function you call a create table that takes a bunch of arguments, and what Liquibase does is it figures out the correct SQL to run. So if you are if you have a team that's maybe not as comfortable with SQL, this works well. You don't need to know SQL as much. The other big advantage that XML and these other formats will do is that they're going to be more database agnostic. Liquibase will figure out the correct SQL for creating a table that looks like this, regardless of your underlying database. You can run the same changelog against Oracle and MySQL and SQL Server and H2 and whatever databases you want, and Liquibase will do the right thing. We also, since we understand what's going on, the rollback functionality, we are able to sort of figure out and know that, okay, to the opposite of create a table is roll back a table. Whereas if you're just using raw SQL, we don't try to parse and understand what's going on in there. So we don't know what's going on. You need to manually specify it. If you go to the next slide, so this is JSON. Like you see, it's the same thing. It's the same, ID author format as the XML had. You still are able to do that sort of create table type function with JSON. It's just JSON structured for people that don't like angle brackets. If you go to the next one, this is YAML. It's exactly the same thing as JSON, and XML is just formatted, for people that don't, that like their white spaces and all of that sort of thing. So it's so it's, especially between XML, JSON, and YAML, it's really, what works best for you. XML, JSON, and YAML, they all add that ability to have the functions, but otherwise, between all four of them, it's kind of what works best for you. So, want to take a break for a second and kind of ask what, if anybody has any sort of questions on formats, want to talk about kind of what things have worked well for them, not worked as well for them with kind of some of those different changelog formats. Any questions so far too? Everyone's so quiet.
You just did a big enough job.
I guess so. I explained it all. So I'll just keep plowing on then. And yeah, like I say, keep thinking about questions. We can always kind of loop back and whatever as we're going along here too. So, once you have your changelog files, once you have your kind of, decided how you want to have your changelog files, a common question is sort of organizing your changelogs. Like I mentioned at the beginning, those changelogs are really just a set of change sets. Actually, if you go back up a couple of them, maybe to the XML one, this example just has one change set in there. Normally in a changelog file, you're going to have multiple different change sets in there, and Liquibase just runs them in the order they are in the file. So it's nice and easy to add to the file. It's easy to move them around if you really need, if the ordering changes, that sort of thing. But yeah, you can have any number of change sets within this changelog file. And a lot of times for beginning projects, especially, just one changelog is just fine. Liquibase is just going to run it and it'll go well. As you get to something that's more larger projects, more complicated projects, something like that, you may want to not have just one big huge file. It gets more to look at. It's just kind of more to open up in your editor. Sometimes you want to just sort of move things out of the way for you. So now if you go back to the directory structure page, thanks. So what Liquibase allows you to do is break these changelog files up, in really kind of any way that you want. Usually the best and easiest way is kind of by major release. And so what you can do is you can have a setup like this where you have your that db changelog root XML file, which is the one that you point Liquibase to, and then that root XML file references the 1.0 version, the 1.1 version, and the 2.0 version, and so that and we'll show you the including of it in a second here. But the idea is you're rather than having everything in the same big db changelog XML file, when you start your 1.0 version, you do that. When you move on to 1.1, you make a new file, and then you're just then you don't have to see and deal with the stuff that is already out and released and done with. The reason that major release tends to work the best is because ideally what you're always doing in Liquibase is appending to your changelog file, kind of at the bottom. Reason for that is because Liquibase always just sort of starts at the beginning and moves down to the end. And if you are if you're adding change sets in the middle, then depending on in different environments that may have run Liquibase at different times, you may end up with some different order that the change sets run in. And while most of the time that shouldn't matter. There can sometimes be times where the order that they execute ends up mattering. And so you introduce a bit of risk, the more often you are not just appending something at the end. And so when you have a broken up changelog like this, in the end, it's still just a flat list of change sets. It's just Liquibase is sort of, including them in and into sort of that big, sort of final list. And so if you have files that get kind of included in a way that you are adding, that you're appending to the end of each of those different changelog files, kind of all at the same time, then in effect, you are inserting new change sets in the middle of that, sort of that final flat list of change logs or of change sets. And so that, depending on how you have it structured, can run into problems. And so, major releases kind of tend to be the point where, okay, we've released this, and so we're not kind of going back to this file anymore. So it makes it more natural. We always just have one file we're appending to. It's not, there's other, depending on your setup and your structure, other things can work well too. Like if you have actually very distinct and independent components or something like that, you can have a changelog per component. And then the fact that, you have, difference in ordering between the components shouldn't matter because they're independent of each other, but it's gonna depend on kind of, what works best for you. Version's usually a good starting point, but there's other options too. And the other thing to mention on there real quick too was, if you go back a second, just kind of storing it in your version control system. Usually, the whole point of the changelog files are to have them tracked in version control along, like the rest of your code is. The changelog format, the reason we have that ID and author in there is to make it more friendly for merges. We track each of the change sets individually. So if you merge in a branch, just because it's earlier in the changelog, the database will know, oh, this one hasn't ran, so let me rerun that again. So it's very version control friendly and designed to be stored in there. And it's usually then best to store that sort of changelog files along with your application code that uses that. As you get more complicated structures, maybe it doesn't make as much sense for you, but that's oftentimes a good starting point.
Hey, Nathan?
Yep.
Just to recap this page, it sounds like our recommendation is to go by major release. So organize your changelogs by major release and use the root changelog concept, which I think you're about to describe in the next slide. Yep. And then make sure to check your changelogs into source control so it's part of your development process and can be deployed alongside your application code.
Yep.
And then I think there's a couple of questions that are going to, you kind of went into a lot of good detail, but I think there's a couple of questions here that after you get past the next slide will be very interesting to dive into, and because there are some really good real world use cases that we can talk about.
All right. Yep. I see those and we'll get to them. And yeah, we'll do this next slide first and I'll get to it. So this is really just kind of an example of how to set up that root changelog structure. So, in that root changelog file, you can certainly have regular change sets in there if you want. But then also within that file, you can do both include and include all. Include lets you specify a specific file. So you can say, include version 1.0 and then another line for include version 1.1 and then another line for 1.2, which can work well. As you get to have a lot of those files, it gets to be a pain to keep updating that root changelog all the time. And so you can use include all, which will just automatically include all of the files that are in a particular directory for you. It sorts them alphabetically. So you just have to keep that in mind as you're naming your files, that it's an alphabetic ordering. But otherwise, include all just kind of sucks them all in that way. And just kind of like the reminder, you can have the included change logs in any format, but the XML, YAML, JSON are the only formats that have this ability to say include something else. The formatted SQL, because we're trying to just be a straight SQL file, and that doesn't have any sort of native including ability. Those formatted SQL can be included as files, but at least your root one needs to be an XML, YAML, or JSON file. Let's see, getting back to the kind of the questions in there, we have kind of asking about, you have two teams working on the same application where prod goes, where those changes go to prod in different timelines. And do we want to have two master change logs for each team? Or do we kind of recommend two master change logs for each team? So the idea is you have a single application. The teams are working on different components, different services, something like that. Is that kind of the idea? And is the question, does each team have a change log file, or kind of how do you manage the fact that some teams go to production at different times than other teams? Was that kind of my understanding of the question correct?
That's correct.
Okay. All right. I think that I spent a lot of time as a consultant, and so my answer oftentimes is it depends. The way I always kind of tend to think of it is that your change log should be a sort of complete and atomic piece of your database that ends up getting deployed together. And so, what's in your root change log and all the ones that it connects off to, it should be, sort of self-contained from the standpoint that it's able to fully create your database. It has, any sort of dependencies between objects are all correctly managed and stored and handled within that changelog file. So as you get to having two independent teams, really kind of the question is, how independent are they from a database standpoint? If you're kind of going with a sort of a microservice sort of structure where each team is in charge of their own schema or their own, their own, even if it's not a separate schema, if the tables and objects that one team is using is completely independent from what the other team is using, having separate changelog is a good idea, because they are separate. You can deploy them separately, and they really are separate and independent things, and combining them together into one big monster changelog just gets in the way of everybody. If they are, if the teams are working on, in the end, the same database structure, and some are adding, one team creates a table, another one eventually needs to foreign key over to it. It's probably better to have a single changelog that both of those teams share. And then if they're deploying to production at different times, use something like, ideally branches in your version control, where both teams are in separate branches and they merge down as they need to into the master or main branch that ends up getting deployed up. That's usually the best way. Otherwise, we have contexts and labels, which you can use to do some controlling of, don't deploy these change sets just yet because this team isn't ready to deploy. You have some options there, but that's where, kind of thinking about how, if you start feeling like you need to use labels and contexts a lot, it probably tends to mean that they are actually very independent and maybe should be completely separate root change logs, but it will kind of depend on your particular needs. Does that help, or need more?
Yeah, sort of helps. Actually, in our case, both the teams, we are using the same schema, or we are pointing to the same database, right?
Yep.
So one of the team is a production support team where their changes go into production very quickly, right? Probably at the end of the sprint, they're moving to production, right? But as development, we do production like at the end of 6 months or something like that, after the end of the PA, right? So we do a lot of development work, right? We
Yep.
do operate on the same schema. So
Yep.
if I maintain, let's say I maintain the same change, I mean, since we're operating in the same schema, I think I believe your recommendation is that go for a single master change log file, right? For both the teams.
Yeah, yep. It sounds like that's what you'd want, because even like your team that's on the 6-month schedule, they're going to be wanting to get those additional change sets that the sort of faster moving team is creating as they actually get deployed out to production. So So it does really feel a lot like a setup where you have like a large next version team that's working in a branch, and then you have another team that's doing hot fixes to the main release more often, but then you're needing to basically merge that, sort of or be kind of more continually merging that main development branch over into your product team's branch, and having the change sets come along as part of that merge into that same shared code base seems like it would be the easiest and best approach for you.
Yeah, okay. Thanks.
Just so I can recap for everybody, that great conversation. So you're proposing having a master change log, and for every release, whether it's the 6-month release team or the every 2-week release team, they'll create a new change log for each release. So what will happen is the team that's moving every 2 weeks is going to be updating the master change log with the new version every 2 weeks, and that'll get pushed back to their master branch, and then the 6-month development team will keep pulling that every 2 weeks to get the latest version of the master changelog and all the other new changelogs that the other team's using. So they'll keep their environment up to date with what's going on in the production world. It gives everybody kind of a chance to work independently, but also work in a very coordinated fashion. And then obviously when the final release goes out, that gets merged into master, and then the new production support team has that next version of their changelog. Is that correct?
Yes, yep, that's what I was saying. And it's good kind of tying it back to that file version thing as well too, because what you may be doing is the hotfix team is adding change sets to that version 1.1 XML file. They just keep adding to that, whereas the product team has created a 2.0 XML version in their branch. And they are just working on that branch. They're working in that change log that's still included in the same root change log. And then whereas the sort of hotfix team is doing a hotfix in that earlier branch. And that that kind of helps that version breakdown kind of helps with that sort of 2-team approach as well too. The other question on there was having the same question, the difference being forks of the same code base. It depends on what do you mean by different forks of the same code base? Can you kind of explain how it's different a little bit more there?
Sure.
Pedro?
Hello there. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So basically, we have like a main product line, and then we have like delivery teams that implement some project customizations in our product. That would be the case scenario, and we are managing those teams with separate code bases.
Okay.
So that's it.
Okay, and so those so you have kind of a setup where you have your main applications in one change log or in one code base, and you have just independent repositories for each of your different customers, for example.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay. So one thing that may work for you in that case, well, is when Liquibase, in your root changelog, when you have your include all and you give it a path, Liquibase has a class path is kind of the term we're using currently, but it's really a set of places that it looks for files in, and that can be a jar file or a directory or a zip file or something like that. That's out in your in your application or in your Liquibase setup or your project file or whatever. And those, so they don't have to necessarily be coming from the same original code base or something like that. So what you'd be able to do is you could have a setup in your root changelog where you say include all, and then you sort of point to your main application, your sort of real application change sets that set up your kind of your standard common database structure there. And then after that, you can do an include all, and then you can have a path like com example custom changes or something like that as a directory. And what Liquibase will do is it'll look through all of the spots that it's configured to look for changelog files in that custom change set or custom changelog directory or whatever. And if it finds any, it'll just include and use that automatically. So then from your customization repositories, what you can do is you can just make that directory structure, and then they just know to add in changelog files, however they're wanting to order them and however they're wanting to break them up, just put them in that directory. And then when that code base is, deployed, to that customer, your main changelog is going to automatically find any of them. Or if there's none, you can configure the include all to just, be okay with that and not execute anything.
Okay, so in that case, we should always work with the mindset that the base product is always the first to be installed, and after that, all the customizations.
Yeah, I think that would be easiest. It'll take a little bit of thinking in there because, sometimes, as you go from version to version, if the customization, like you maybe customize some table, like if your customization ends up dropping a table, and then later on, like in another release,
we have to bring the full testing to the CI stage. So
that would probably be good to kind of help know that and just kind of think about some of your potential options for, like how you can sort of structure your code and your kind of way of managing the database on that. I don't know kind of how likely it is you're going to have kind of conflicts in there. One thing Liquibase does have is preconditions that you can put in your change sets. So if there's times when, like in your main code base, you are modifying a table that maybe a customer might have dropped or something like that, you can have a precondition that you add in saying, if this table, if this table exists, then you can do this change set. Otherwise, just mark it as ran and continue on. So you have some ability to control that with change sets, or sorry, with preconditions at runtime. But the more you add in sort of that if logic into your change logs, the more, the more variability you have in what could be executed, and so it gets more complicated or more risky. I always try to avoid, I always feel like, the big goal with the database is to avoid risk and avoid an uncertainty in what's going on, and any sort of if statements basically that you're having, either preconditions or labels or context, it's introducing, variability into your flow. And, while you sometimes need to do it, always ask, do we really need to do this, or is there another way we could be structuring it to avoid this?
Okay. We have to review our customization strategy for the database. Firstly, I think. Okay, thank you very much.
Yep, no problem. Any other questions before moving on? I'm bad at paying attention to time, so hopefully we're not taking too long on it. I'll just go along and see how it goes.
You're doing good.
All right.
We have all the questions. Unless there's new questions, that was all the questions from the chat.
All right. Then we can continue on here. Let's see. So this is talking a bit about team standards here, and just kind of things to think about as you're making these change logs. So the first one is one change per change set. So this is, it's what we try to do in Liquibase within each change set is run it as a transaction, because in the end we need to mark that change set. We track in our database changelog table, has this been ran or not? And so what we need to do is we need to be able to kind of run what's inside that change set as a transaction, so that if anything fails along the way, we can just roll it back and everything's, none of it has ran at all. And then if it passes, then we can mark it as executed and moving on. The trouble gets to be is if within a change set, if you have more than one change types that do an auto commit to your database, like you have two create tables, and in a lot of databases, that's going to automatically commit the transaction. If your first create table succeeds and your second one fails, then we're in a state where Liquibase doesn't consider that change set to be executed. And so the next time you try to do an update, it will try to run it, but then your first create table will now fail with a object already exists. So, the trick is to make sure that what's in your change set is transactionally together. And because most everything that you do with Liquibase is, create table, modify, they're the sort of structure modifying things, which on most databases, not all databases, but most databases are auto committing. The safest route is to just have one change type per change set. You can have more, like if you're doing inserts or updates or deletes, a lot of times then it's, then it makes a lot of sense to have more than one per change set, because you want those to be transactionally done together. But you have to keep in mind your transactional boundaries, and when in doubt, don't have more than one change in the same change set. The ID format, the ID is just a string, so it can be anything. Sometimes you can have something descriptive like, like I added, added table address or whatever you want. My personal feeling is that, the ID description isn't, it's there just to kind of uniquely identify, and what's going on in the change log. You can see from the comment, if you put it in there, you should be able to see, from the fact that kind of right below it, it says, create table name equals X. You don't need to redefine it in there. But, so I always just kind of start with 1, go to 2, go to 3, just because then I don't need to think about it as I'm adding more change sets. I have enough other stuff to think about that trying to figure out, what is a unique identifier I can use for this particular change set. Just kind of starting with a number and incrementing seems easiest. The reason we have both the author and the ID as part of the unique identifier for the change, for that change set, is because then, that ID you only need to think about it being unique within you. As long as you're using your own unique author, then it means that the ID, you just have to keep them unique among yourself. It's kind of a way to make a manually managed globally unique identifier, basically, is kind of what we're going for there. And then the other piece we use to identify each change log is the path to the change set, is the path to the change set file it's in. So if you do have a root change log that includes a bunch of other ones, the IDs only have to be unique for your particular author within that file. You can restart with one in each new changelog file, and that's just fine. You just have to, like I said, it's the ID is all about just kind of coming up with something unique that Liquibase can use to track it. And so, at least from a starting point, starting with something simple like a number works well. But it's up to you kind of what makes sense, especially if you're trying to do some more complicated reporting or something like custom reporting on it. Maybe you might try to use the ID for part of the reporting thing, but yeah, it's up to you on there. And the last one in there is, let's see, the one you listed in there is documenting unclear or complicated change sets. So, it's like any other code. If you feel like your code is super complicated, the first thing to do should be to make your code less complicated. If you can't do that, we do have a comments tag that you can put on any of your change sets to explain it. But from my laziness as a developer side, I tend to only put the comment in there if looking at the change log, I don't understand what's going on, or if I know in 3 months when I'm coming back to it and I'm trying to know, why was this here, add the comment there. So really, you use it like you would comment your code. In the end, your changelog files are really source code for managing your database. And so comment accordingly like you do with any other change sets. All right, let's see, go to the next one here.
Real quick, Nathan, there's a question. Karthik just had a question in the chat. He said, let's say you archive an old changelog file. Now the database change table and changelog file will not be in sync. Will this pose any issue?
That's a good question. Let me get through this slide just to kind of get through them, and then I'll come back to it, just because it's a little, it's maybe a separate topic.
Sounds great. Thanks.
Sound good? All right, we'll do that. Okay, so rollback plan. Change sets have the ability to do rollback. So we have a nice Liquibase rollback option that will, kind of go back in history and undo things that have been done. And while you can always add that rollback tags as you need when you get to the point of needing to roll back, a lot of times the point where you're needing to do a rollback is suddenly a big, managers are angry at you, emergency going on. And so thinking about your rollback at that point is adding extra stress to an already stressful time. And so, think about what your rollback plans are. Maybe test out some of the rollback during development. If you are using formatted SQL, just sort of make sure you're always including that rollback tag as you're making new change sets. If you're using XML, YAML, JSON, many of those we can automatically have generate rollback for you, but not all of them. And so, like I said, test them out, add them in when you don't need them, before you need them. Otherwise, it'll just kind of be more stressful for you later. And then the number 5 option in there is managing your reference data. So that's, a lot of times people think about Liquibase around just, I need this to get my schema in the case in the setup that it's at. But a lot of times what your application needs to be deployed isn't just your schema structure, but like seed data or reference data or something like that. Like, you create a states table and then you need to get that states table populated. You can include the fact that we need to populate, our states table in your changelog file, right after it's been created, so that changelog file continues to be this gets my database ready to go, not it gets my structure ready to go, and then I need to do something different to get it pre-populated in. A couple other nice things that you can leverage with the reference data by having it in there as they're created is that then, like you create your change set, you're going along, you create your change set that creates the state table, for example, then you have a change set that loads in your states. And then later on, you decide you need an additional column on that states column. So you add add column table or add column change set for that. That Liquibase update is still going to work for everybody because you're loading your data in it's still happening before that extra column is being added in. And so it avoids a problem a lot of times people have with loading sort of state or seed data, where as your schema keeps changing, what you're having to load in keeps changing. But if you are loading it in with Liquibase at the sort of that kind of common and consistent points as you need them, then that seed data gets migrated along with like your production data would have been. And so that also then works not just with seed data, but also QA or test data as well too. A lot of times what I've done is I've had change sets that just load in, additional test data from a big CSV file. And then I can mark those change sets with a context of QA or test or something like that, so that in development, tests, and in all those environments that I want that test data, it can just come in, and it's I don't worry about. I have a lot less problems with breaking test data with that setup. But then when you run against production, you don't include that test context, and so then that test data doesn't deploy. So that works well for that. I think this was the last section on what's the next slide look like again?
Manage stored data.
Okay, so you can go back to the previous one, and I'll answer the earlier question and any other ones people have about sort of team changelog standards. So asking about archiving old changelog files. So first, what I would tend to say is I try to avoid archiving old changelog files in general, just because what I like is the ability to always be able to take my changelog file and go from an empty database all the way up to my current production database. that I find that very useful for, onboarding new developers, or even just kind of setting up database environments within your different, like pipelines and CI/CD setups. And when you're archiving your changelogs, old changelog files, what you're ending up doing is you're at least changing the sort of process that went along. There's certainly ways that you can, archive the old ones and do like a backup of a database at a current spot. So you can restore that and then, migrate from that point forward. But that's just kind of adding an additional step into that, restore your database format. So like I say, I tend to try to avoid the archiving. And, a lot of times the reason I feel like I wouldn't want to archive a file is, either because they're really large, but the include, tends to avoid that problem. Or I have something that's really slow, like it takes a long time to go, but databases are fast enough that usually it's just kind of there's a few things that are slow in there. Like maybe I created an index and then I dropped the index. And so rather than completely archiving and wiping out that whole, sort of known good path to get from empty to the current state, I'll go and remove specific change sets, like the create index, and then, the drop index, I would put a precondition on there saying if the index exists, then drop it, so that it still stays fast even with the archiving. But then to kind of get to your point, suppose you do want to archive a file, archive a changelog, meaning, you're no longer referencing it. It's really kind of the same as the case of I just deleted a couple of change sets within a particular changelog. It ends up, sort of structurally the same, where what Liquibase does is it's really just looking at the change sets that you're giving it. For each of those, it looks to see, have I ran this or not? If there's other change sets that are in the database changelog table saying, I already ran these, 55 change sets, but it's not in the changelog file, Liquibase doesn't care. It just thinks, well, maybe that was in a, maybe that's in a future branch that hasn't, isn't in the changelog file you're looking at. Maybe you deleted it. Whatever. Liquibase isn't going to know or care about that. The only potential problem you might hit is just that unique identification thing where, if you archived a change log or you delete a change set, but you already ran those change sets against a database, if you end up creating a new change set that uses the same ID and author in the same file name as the old one was, then you're going to get a checksum error saying that, this change set was already ran against the database. So you just need to make sure that you're not reusing those ID author file path pairs. But otherwise, having change sets that at one point ran against the database that aren't in the changelog file is just fine.
Okay, just to recap, Nathan, good answer, very complete. Real quick, Karthik, just sounds like yes, you can do it. Liquibase will work just fine. I'm curious to hear why you're. What's the motivation? Why are you wanting to do that?
No, I just want to. We're just getting started on Liquibase. I was just curious on that question. We are not planning to archive or anything right now. I just want to understand what's going to happen in that case.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't know use case.
Yeah, it is a very good question.
All right. Well, we have 10 more minutes, Nathan. Do you want to see if we can get through the rest of the slides?
I will do my best. I like as you're summarizing I do like to talk too much. Let's see, stored logic. I'll talk about this one just sort of fast here. So most of the change sets, like create table, that sort of stuff, they're very much I do this thing, then I do something else, then I do something else. With Liquibase, you're not, if you have a create table change set, you don't go back and modify that create table when you want to add an additional column. It's always sort of a roll forward setup where, then you add another change set that adds a column, and then another change set that drops one of the columns, and another change set that renames it. So you're always kind of rolling forward. And that works well and fine because it's capturing in version control then also your particular steps that you're going along, and that's a useful and easy thing to do. Stored logic can be a bit different because from a coding side, it feels a lot more like a large script that when you find a bug or want to change in it, what you want to do is you want to go and change that existing stored logic sort of text file to, like fix your named variable or whatever, so that then when you look at your Git history of that file, you can see, okay, it was the stored logic script was changed, these 10 times by these people. You have different people in different branches that want to kind of merge the things into it. So a lot of times the stored logic, so that's like create procedure, drop, or like create triggers and functions and that sort of stuff. Those you want to manage differently from a Git standpoint, and Liquibase lets you do that. We have a run on change equals true attribute you can put on your change sets, and then what that'll do is when Liquibase, using the checksums that we track, when it sees that change set has changed, then it just reruns it for you. The thing to kind of the thing to keep in mind is then it ends up it kind of keeps rerunning these at kind of different times, and so you can run into cases where like your initial where the change log or where the create procedure is in the change log, when it runs the first time, it works because some tables have been created, and it's you create table A, create table B, you have a stored procedure defined then that queries those tables. Then you're good to go. It runs, it goes fine. Then you have you decide to go in and add table C and then modify your stored procedure to also check table C. But the problem is your creating of table C is in your changelog file after your stored procedure is at. And so you end up rerunning that stored procedure, and it fails now because table C doesn't exist. And so you sometimes have to move where that create for the stored procedure is around. Oftentimes the easiest thing then to do is to have an include all at the very bottom of your changelog that you keep there all of the time, that says, that brings in all your stored procedures. Because usually, the stored procedures always just kind of rely on all the other stuff. And so just always having them at the end works, but it is something that you'll have to kind of do a little more management of kind of where it is. And so you'll want to kind of think about that trade-off of being able to use include all to just continue editing that stored procedure versus just putting new versions of the stored procedure like you do any other rolling forward thing. It's up to you kind of what makes the most sense.
Yeah, Nathan, I think that's a really good point. I never really thought about it, but having all of your stored procedures in a separate change log and always having that as the last thing in your master change log, so that whatever you do your stored logic last. That makes a lot of sense.
And because Liquibase just does everything in the order they are in the changelog file, when you do hit a case where some of those dependencies shift around, all you have to do is move them around in the changelog file, and you're good to go. All right, next one. I think we're getting close to the end. This is just kind of talking about, kind of wrapping it up with a bit of a running your update command. What Liquibase update does is that is really just looking at your change sets in your changelog file, looking at that unique identification of ID, author, file path, and comparing it to what's in your database changelog table. And anything that is not in the database changelog table, it will execute just in the order that it's in there. And any ones that it has ran that are in that list, it'll just skip over those, knowing it's already ran. And so, as it helps to kind of understand that concept of, in the end, it's just a flat list, and the flat list of independent change sets that we are grabbing the ones that haven't ran. And it's a fairly stupid and simple algorithm, but it works really well. But keeping in mind that's how it works can help you kind of reason through some of the stuff that's going on in there. Let's see, next one. All right, so talking a little bit about sort of your standard workflow, kind of your inner loop, or kind of whatever you want to talk about it. Usually what kind of the best practice is sort of starting with your change sets. When you want to have a change to your database, what you do is you have your favorite ID or editor, you open up your changelog file, or let's see, so you realize, okay, I need a new column added to this table. So what you do is you open your changelog file, you add a new change set to it of add column, then you run Liquibase update against your local database. Maybe you mistyped something and it fails. So you fix your change set, run it again, and then it passes. And then you test your application code and make sure everything's working with that new column. And then you end up committing both your application code and your database control code together, because then when other people on your team do a pull and they get your application change that expects that new column, it's also at the same time getting that update to the changelog file that has that add column, so that they both kind of come down together. But then by starting with your change set, it's different than maybe before. What you do is you would go into your database tool and add the column, and then after the fact, kind of try to capture it back to the changelog file. Instead, start with capturing it in the changelog file, because then you don't forget to do that last step. You don't end up accidentally having a difference between what you did directly in your database versus what you're saving kind of for the rest of the team. And so by starting with the change set, it just sort of smooths that flow out a little bit and makes it so that that what you did to your database is exactly the same thing as what's going to eventually be applied out to production. And so, yeah, kind of work through that way, even though it's a slight, maybe difference from how you used to do it.
Great, Nathan. Thank you very much for that. And maybe if we can jump on to the announcements, we have about 2 more minutes left, and we can go ahead and do that, Caroline.
Awesome, perfect. Okay, so some updates we wanted to talk about. So we are currently on the search for some community glue, as we call it. We are hiring for a technical community manager. Again, you can kind of see from the slides, we'd like for someone to be a little bit more of a power user of Liquibase. They're comfortable writing content, and they're comfortable with engaging with users throughout the community. So if you or if someone is potentially interested, feel free to reach out to Kevin directly. He is the hiring manager on that. So if you think that we're a fun group to hang out with, you can actually officially join our team, and we'd love to meet with you. Also wanted to touch base about our major release, 4.5. This includes quality checks as well. I highly recommend taking a look at it. Quality checks was kind of a big splash for us, and so we're super excited about it. But if you've not yet updated to the latest version, I recommend that you do that. And then also Mario is here. Hello, Mario. Mario is looking for feedback from users on how we can really focus on making Liquibase easy and better. And I mean, we're always trying to make it better, but we always want to make it easier to use. And so we are looking for very targeted feedback. Again, I'll send out the slides, so you'll have a link to the Calendly. And if you want to chat with him, anytime that you do product feedback sessions, you do get 4 points towards Liquibase Legend. So it's a great way to start snagging those points. Swag alert. Hello to our Liquibase leaders. You have gotten your swag in the mail. Thanks for your patience on that. We are slowly working on getting the Legend swag out. We had a bit of a delay because we wanted to include some swanky new sweatshirts as well. So we're in the process of ordering those. So thank you for your patience if you are a Liquibase Legend. That is all from us today. I know it's noon here, at least in Texas. And so I just wanted to say thanks again for joining us. We will start kind of doing more of these best practices style roundtables versus just kind of a general open-ended Q&A. So if you have feedback for us, you can actually give it directly in the meetup group as well. But we'll send out a message with the slides. The recording will be on YouTube. It's going to be a link. So I'll send that out to you as well. But we really appreciate all joining us. And it's so great to see new and familiar faces. All righty. Well, that is all from us today. I hope everybody has a great rest of their week, and we will see you next month.
All right. Thank you, Caroline. And thank you, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for coming, everyone.
Y'all take care. All right.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Bye-bye.